Newcastle Video Movie Makers Incorporated have been in the business for just 2 years. They were commissioned by the Port Stephens Children's Activity Van Service to make a training film on the van's operations. A production unit of 5 video volunteers set to the task of researching, shooting and editing the movie, which took just over a year to make. The only cost was $56 for blank tapes, but the producers feel their efforts have been well rewarded.
Members learned a lot from the exercise, mainly working as a team, learning production techniques. I guess we also learned a bit about children's services in the Hunter region.
They were nominated for the award by the Activity Van Service, and the tape has gone into circulation as a training video for other children's playgroups in the region. The video movie makers are now in a league above the hit and miss home movie enthusiast.
They're a group of very serious people who want to use their equipment, their home video equipment, to the best advantage.
They're already working on their next project and welcome newcomers who'd like to learn a bit more about movie making.
Just a desire to learn to use your home video equipment to its best advantage.
The search for the man began at 4 this afternoon after Sydney Water Police received a distress call from the 10-metre ketch Phoenix. The local volunteer coastal patrol radioed the vessel and guided it to the safety of Nelson Bay.
Coast Guard, here is Phoenix. Unfortunately,
now ring this number and the answering service will give you another number. You ring that one and get you on. Okay?
It's believed the yacht with 3 crewmen on board left Newcastle this morning. The missing man fell overboard without a life jacket into seas reaching 4 metres on a 5-metre swell. 3 private craft tried to round the headland to help, but high seas and winds gusting to 40 kilometres an hour forced all 3 to turn back to port. A helicopter from the Williamtown RAAF base searched for 2.5 hours, but it too was forced to return as low cloud and sea spray made the search impossible.
It's very windy out there. The sea temperature is moderate. I believe the man was a good swimmer. He was inside of the coast. He does have a few chances. However, it is very hard to tell what a current is going to do, and being 9/10 of his body underwater, you really can't say.
Weather permitting, the search will resume at first light tomorrow. Alison Peters for Newsnight.
Until now, towing companies have had virtually free rein with no government body regulating the industry.
Normally the driver does come under a little bit of pressure. Depends on how vulnerable the driver is. Most people in an accident would know what they want to do with their car. A few people don't know what they want to do with their car and are likely to get pressure from varied number of tow trucks, mostly representing panel shops that actually not after the tow, they're after the panel shop work.
But all that's to change under requirements set down by the recently formed Tow Truck Industry Council. From next month, operators will have to meet tough new licensing standards. Only those vehicles displaying special TT number plates will be allowed to tow cars from an accident scene. And within 3 years, every towing company will be required to have a holding yard for smashed cars. With registration and other charges rising, it's possible only the bigger companies like Fenwick's towing service will survive.
As I said, the licences, which would cost me about $100, $200 last year for all of my trucks, will now cost me about $1,000. And over the next 3 years, I'm looking at spending about $50,000 on getting my yard licensed under the Local Council Act to comply with the Tow Truck Act.
Mr Hayes believes the new standards are a good idea. Not only will they protect motorists, but also improve the reputation of the towing industry. The changes, however, won't stop there. The Tow Truck Council wants to implement a roster system so that only 1 truck instead of 4 or 5 arrives at an accident scene. And plans are also afoot to provide specialised training for drivers.
Knights moneyman Mike Armstrong was going over the books today, finalising contracts for next season. The Knights face a $1.3 million cap on players' payments, $100,000 down on last year's rate.
It's a bit harder for us to operate and we've got to reduce our plans somewhat on what we'd originally planned.
The Knights will cut out reserve grade and under-21 contracts. According to Mike Armstrong, these players have agreed to play purely for match payments, with some incentives to play first grade. All the first grade players have been re-signed, barring one, former captain Sam Stewart.
Do you think he's left his run a bit too late?
Well, you could assume that under the circumstances, but it still comes back to a matter. We've got room for Sam at a certain level, and if that is the case that comes to bear, well, fine. We'll fit Sam in, but your original assumption is reasonably correct, yeah.
Stewart was rated as the linchpin of the side when it began in 1988. It's rumoured Sam has been approached by Eastern Suburbs. He was unavailable for comment as he's on holidays in New Zealand.
The prime mover was taking a large coal truck from Hexham to Mount Thorley, but trouble struck at Maitland. Authorities reasoned the best way to clear this pedestrian overpass was to approach it from the shoulder on the wrong side of the road, but their carefully calculated plans failed to take account of the boggy conditions from the morning downpour.
Due to the heavy rain that we've had, it's become stuck in the mud, not actually bogged, but due to the wet, muddy surface, the back wheels are gaining no traction and it's just slipping, not going anywhere.
For several hours, the escort crew tried various ways to gain enough traction to clear the bog and carry on, but it proved to be a difficult task.
At this stage, we're hoping to be able to pull the load out. We will then have to probably turn it around and take it via John Renshaw Drive up that way.
Meantime, there was more trouble with the rain at Warners Bay. A southbound driver lost control of her vehicle as she rounded a bend on Warners Bay Road. The car veered onto the wrong side of the road and collided with an oncoming Gemini, which then ploughed into a power pole. 2 women were taken to Belmont Hospital with chest injuries, with a third admitted for observation. And wet roads weren't the only danger brought about by the bleak conditions. Seas and swell were in what meteorologists call a confused state, with dangerous sweeps and rips offshore. Apart from the dedicated fishermen, beaches were deserted today. A low-pressure system east of Coffs Harbour has been blamed for the fierce weather. Seas will ease, but the swells increase as the low moves to the east-northeast. Leslie Robinson, NBN News.
Edward Duke has worked around the world designing buildings for major cities. He's returned to Newcastle, where he was schooled, to set up practice in the inner city. In an address to the Newcastle Businessmen's Club, Duke hit out at the no change, no progress mentality, which he claims is stifling development. He says working within council's design guidelines is like working in a straitjacket, and he says developers are turned away with unworkable floor space rules.
What that means, of course, is that a developer can only build a certain amount of floor space, his costs are higher, and therefore the returns on the investment are not as good as they could be.
Take, for example, this building in Watt Street. Council limitations on this block mean that if it were to be demolished, its replacement may end up smaller than the original. That makes the development economically unviable. Equally, according to Duke, the attempt to make new developments look like heritage buildings means inferior buildings are built.
And that seems to be what Newcastle is after at the moment. They've ascertained there's an ambience, I think that word has been used quite often. That ambience is of buildings that look old, they look a little bit dirty, they're mostly brown, and they look old. That ambience apparently is something the council wants to continue with.
Duke has called for council to stop dictating colour and building form in its code, increase floor space ratios and produce a master plan for development in the city.
The crime clean-up rate in the state's northern region represents a healthier picture than the state average. Newcastle, Gosford, Maitland and Port Macquarie police districts have all recorded a better clean-up rate than the state. The improvement, rounded off to the nearest percentage point, is strong over the 1988 to 89 period, and for the 9 months up to March 1990, it's once again encouraging. Only Newcastle shows a drop in the clean-up rate over that period, from 39% to 35%. Chief Inspector Ian Cleary says that figure should be considered in the light of a big drop in actual crime committed over the same period.
For Newcastle District, comparing last year to this year, there are 2,577 less offences this year than last year, and that's a dramatic decrease, and that's brought about by proactive policing, police being out where they're supposed to be.
Mr Cleary says Newcastle police are often involved in more serious crime than neighbouring divisions, requiring more time and more manpower to reach a result. However, he says he hasn't lost sight of improving the clean-up rate.
With beat policing having just commenced in Newcastle, I'm sure in the next 3 to 6 months that there will be such a remarkable reduction in offences, and the clear-up rate, it'll make us stand out amongst all other districts in New South Wales.
The storm-battered 10-metre ketch Phoenix limped into Nelson Bay late yesterday after a short hop from Newcastle to Port Stephens turned into a tragedy. The crew were still too shaken to talk of their ordeal off Port Stephens when they battled massive seas in a futile attempt to rescue fellow crewman 49-year-old Christopher Plord of North Nowra. A search by private craft and the Lloyd's rescue helicopter from RAF Base Williamtown failed to locate the man, and poor light forced a halt to the operation. This morning, the Westpac NBN rescue helicopter resumed the search, battling gusting southerlies and rain squalls which hampered visibility. The crewman was reported overboard just south of Port Stephens. The survivors told police he wasn't wearing a life jacket at the time. However, they maintained visual contact with him for more than half an hour as they made repeated attempts to close with the struggling man. At one stage, they were within 100 metres, but frustratingly lost sight of him, this time for good. The search was called off today, shortly before midday. Police say they'll conduct a shoreline operation tomorrow in the event of conditions still being too rough for boating.
Flags were raised around the world today, celebrating the 45th anniversary of the ratification of the United Nations Charter. In Newcastle, Lord Mayor John McNaughton spoke of the UN as a vital cog in international peace and security. According to the President of the United Nations Hunter Branch Association, Dr. Romesh Amar, the UN has kept more than 70 disputes from erupting into war, and it will ease the crisis in the Persian Gulf.
United Nations is the only hope that can prevent war, which it is trying as best as it can.
Representing the youth of the world, children from the Waratah Orthopaedic School supported the celebrations, urging the 159 nations in the UN to continue their push for peace.
Nearly 1 year after Lee's brutal death in Sandhills at North Stockton, her killer was sentenced before a packed gallery in Newcastle Supreme Court. Matthew Webster sat quietly in the dock, hands clasped and head bowed. Justice Wood said Lee's death was a callous and brutal killing to cover a sexual assault. It was a death he described as unnecessary and totally preventable. He said it was the parents' responsibility to ensure there was supervision at the tragic 16th birthday party. All young people are owed protection from the inevitable peer pressure to experiment with the alcohol, drugs and sexual promiscuity that occurred here. The court heard that Webster's violent actions on the night of the murder were a combination of anger, frustration and the effects of 24 twist tops and 10 to 15 cones of cannabis. Justice Wood said Webster had no plans to kill Lee until the last moment, but he had decided to have sex with her. Speaking to others earlier in the evening, Webster said, Hey Dudes were going to get Lee pissed and go through her. Justice Wood said a life sentence was inappropriate, as Webster was a first offender of otherwise good character who was genuinely remorseful. But as Lee's distraught relatives left the court, there were calls for a harsher punishment.
Life, but he wouldn't get it. 20 years at least in jail. I feel what happened to that child, 14-year-old child.
All that we're trying to say is that it's not going to bring her back. She lived to 14 years old and he's going to be out in 14 years, so...
It's not enough. I think he took my daughter's life, destroyed our lives.
I really can't understand why a human being would kill another human being. I just can't understand that.
Lee's grandmother, Margaret Heyman, endorsed the judge's dim view of the lack of parental supervision at the party.
Fancy having a 14 or 16-year-old party and not one parent there, not one. And two people to control the party, both of them assaulted the child and one murdered her.
There were concerns too that not everyone has been brought to justice for the humiliation Lee suffered on the night of her murder.
Yeah, I think those other people. I see my daughter after the autopsy and the amount of damage that's done to us more than...
I feel that there's a lot not told in this thing. The sexual assault part that I am not happy about.
As news of Webster's sentence spread, the close-knit Stockton community echoed the calls for a tougher punishment.
He should have had the key locked away and stayed there. That's all I can say.
I don't think they should keep him there for life.
Well, I say anybody did murder needs life in jail.
As far as I'm concerned, I should get hanged. You don't deserve to live.
Maybe a bit less, I'd say. Maybe around 10 years. It was sort of only just a one-off thing. Not as if he was a raving killer or anything.
Life.
He should have got life.
Matthew Webster's earliest date for parole will be the 16th of February 2004. Leslie Robinson, NBN News.
Some of these people have been camped outside the gallery for over a week. Even the blustery winds and rain have not driven them away. It's a tradition which began 28 years ago when the gallery held its first Collector's Choice exhibition. All the artists featured in the exhibition have displayed their work at the gallery in the past, and it's their way of saying thank you for the support. For the public, it's an art collector's paradise, with a Pro Hart or a Clifton Pugh for sale for under $240. And this group has ensured they won't miss out on the bargains.
I was hoping to get, what's that artist's name?
Hyson.
A Hyson, but I don't know whether there will be any of her work in or not. There was last year, but I missed out last year. But no, I just whatever I like. I buy for pleasure, and so whatever I like.
And this is what they're waiting for, works by the who's who of the Australian art world. This piece by Arthur Boyd would normally sell for around $800. Its price this weekend is $240. Other well-known artists featured include Ray Crook and Donald Friend. Locally, both David Middlebrook and Dorothy Wishart have contributed pieces. And that is just a smattering, with 151 artists to choose from, as well as pottery, glasswork and sculpture. The Von Berto Gallery is bound to be a popular place this weekend. But don't get too excited about getting that favourite piece. By Friday, this small group will have grown to more than 100.
Confined to residents of Lake Macquarie, an excellent lineup of talent will be chasing the major award. Knights winger Ashley Gordon had a brilliant season, scoring 13 tries and making the Kangaroo train-on squad. Darren Griffin continues to build up an impressive career on the golf course. Adam Quinn proved he's one of the top windsurfer exponents with a top performance at the World Titles. And Todd Wilshire amazed everyone with a stunning solo series to decide the world champion, finishing third by 1 point. Joining that illustrious crew will be canoeist Art Solaris, 10-pin bowler Anne-Marie Putney, sailor Adam Piper and baseballer Jason Dormer. The Junior Sports Star of the Year will be keenly contested with another outstanding field nominated. Swimmers, hockey players, rodeo riders, rugby league, BMX, athletics and surf lifesaving are represented. Former Olympic champion Dawn Fraser will be the guest speaker for the evening.